start us off with that, please.
Karen just needs a couple minutes. The computer just went out, so she has to reboot it for like 2 minutes.
Oh, okay, then we can wait. Okay, I just got a notice that said to start the meeting, so
yeah.
All right, no problem. Then why don't we just wait for the mayor?
We could probably go ahead with the preamble.
Yeah, I don't mind knocking that out. Okay, Ingrid, why don't you continue, please?
This meeting is compliant with the Governor's Executive Order N-29-20 issued on March 17th, 2020, allowing for deviation of teleconference rules required by the Brown Act. The purpose of this is to provide the safest environment for staff, council members, and the public while allowing for public participation. The public may address the council using exclusively remote public comment options. The council may take action on any item listed in the agenda. Public meeting videos. Members of the public may view the City Council meeting by logging into the Zoom webinar listed below. City Council meetings can also be viewed live and/or on demand via the city's YouTube channel on youtube.com/BrisbaneCA or on Comcast Channel 27. Archive videos can be replayed on the city's website, brisbaneca.org/meetings. To address the council. The City Council meeting will be an exclusively virtual meeting. The City Council agenda materials may be viewed online at brisbaneca.org at least 24 hours prior to a special meeting and at least 72 hours prior to a regular meeting. Remote public comments. Meeting participants are encouraged to submit public comments in writing in advance of the meeting. Aside from commenting while in the Zoom webinar, the following email and text line will also be monitored during the meeting, and public comments received will be noted for the record during oral communications 1 and 2 or during an item. Email ipadilla@brisbaneca.org, text 628-219-2922, join the Zoom webinar at with ID 991-9362-8666 with the passcode 123456 and the call-in number 1-669-900-9128. If you need special assistance to participate in the meeting, please contact me, the city clerk, at 415-508-2113. Notification in advance of the meeting will enable the city to make reasonable arrangements to ensure accessibility to this meeting. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ingrid. So as Angel had mentioned, the mayor should be here in just a minute. She's got some technical difficulties. So yeah, just hang tight and resume as soon as she gets here. All righty, so I still have been notified that the mayor is still having some technical issues. So why don't we just start the meeting, and when she jumps in, we'll be ready to go. So let's start off with call to order. And if you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of
the United States of
States
America
of America,
and to the
and
republic
to the republic
for which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty,
liberty
justice
and
for all.
justice for all.
Great, thank you. All right, Ingrid, why don't you start off with the roll call, please?
Before that, Mayor Pro Tem, would you like to get a report out of closed session?
You know, that would be great. Tom, can you give us a report, please?
The council met as the housing authority in closed session and provided direction as required or as requested pursuant to the agenda. The council also met as the council in closed session to discuss 3 potential litigation matters, and direction was given on 3. No final action was taken on any of the items. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tom.
I'm sorry, I think we did have a direction given on one item on the matter of the litigation.
That's correct.
I'm missing something.
The litigation.
The Stone case.
The liability claim.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about, okay. Yes, I am sorry. The council gave direction to the city attorney on a pending claim that had been rejected. The appeal is denied. Thank you, Mayor. God, I'm really out of it. Councilmember O'Connell. I'm still on housing authority on my head. Sorry.
Totally fine. All right, now roll call, please. Ingrid.
Councilmember Davis.
Aye. Here.
Councilmember Lentz.
Here.
Councilmember Mackin.
Here.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Present.
And Mayor Cunningham will be joining us when she is able to.
All right, great. And can I get an adoption of tonight's agenda?
So moved.
All right.
Mayor Pro Tem, I'd also staff would like to pull consent calendar C for amendments to for the minutes.
Item C. Okay.
Yeah.
That's staff pull. All right. Councilmember O'Connell, you'll make that motion with that.
Yes, I will make the motion to approve without item C on the consent calendar.
Excellent. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz.
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin.
Aye.
And Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we have 2 presentations. We have a special presentation by our fairly minted state senator, Josh Becker. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing just fine. Thank you for visiting. Well, I guess virtually visiting Brisbane this evening.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, the floor is yours. So why don't you give us your update?
Sure. I just wanted to chat a little bit, take a couple questions, and then I'll let you get on with your meeting. For those of you who don't know me, Josh Becker, as Cliff mentions, took office, I guess, really at the end December. We're sworn in, but really been kind of fully at it about 3.5 months up in Sacramento. And if I ran for state senate because I really thought I could make a difference, and I like innovative solutions to big public problems, and that's what's been really fun to kind of put my nose to the grindstone, so to speak, on this. And so really, my background is in the public sector and the private sector and in the nonprofit sector. I founded and chaired a nonprofit group for 20 years called Full Circle Fund, which was all about supporting innovative solutions in education, economic opportunity, environment, and health. And that kind of formed a lot of my background in thinking of what are some innovative ideas I'd want to bring up to Sacramento. Also had a number of stints in the private sector in terms of bringing analytics to law and running a legal tech and access to justice incubator, and a lot of experience in clean tech and in biotech, and really taking all those pieces of experiences with me. Former press secretary on Capitol Hill as well, so kind of have a little bit of a national perspective on some issues. But really, kind of the theme running through my background has been about social justice and equity, and figuring out really, hopefully, scalable ways to tackle income inequality and to enable economic mobility, and for folks to pursue the California dream. And I was fortunate to be appointed to a number of great committees by the pro tem, who's the head of the Senate, Toni Atkins. She's been super welcoming so far. Transportation, which I know is a big one, I'm sure we'll talk about. Energy and utilities, which is really the key committee, on climate change. I'm also vice chair of the Joint Climate Change Committee. So this is the committee between the Assembly and the Senate that are tackling big climate change issues, as well as something called business and professions and economic development. So, which is a committee that does a bunch of stuff around small businesses, figuring out different business licensing, as well as economic development. Is really one of the few places in the state Senate to do real economic development work. And, I've been trying to, as I say, it's a very entrepreneurial environment actually up there, in the sense that since being elected, you get to hire about 14 staff. So I've got my district director, Nicole Fernandez, on the line as well. And we've got a great combination of folks in our office, people who had worked for Jerry Hill and have that experience, as well as some other people coming in fresh with some new ideas. So it's just a really great team, super proud of, have a stellar team up in Sacramento. Same thing of, some Sacramento vets with some other new folks that we brought in as well. And it's just a great combo. And then you have to come up with 17 bills. So we had 17 bills we came up with and put in fully written. And now that was in the first couple of months. And now it's really about going through committee. So that's the process. We read 5 bills this week that made it out of committee. And the bills really follow some of those themes that I mentioned. So I've got 5 on climate change, including, I think, probably the 2 biggest climate change bills in California this year. One is 24/7 clean energy bill, which would really do 3 things. It would let us track clean energy on an hourly basis. Right now, we only track renewable energy credits on an annual basis. And it would set targets to reach 100% clean energy, but particularly focus on those hard to serve times of day, the 4 to 9 o'clock winter peak, where we're using, probably about 80% fossil fuels today. Under this bill, will have to be at 60% clean energy for that toughest to serve time by 2030, which means we'll be basically at about 100% for everything else. So that's super exciting. And then one on concrete and cement, which is, as you may know, 8% of the world's global GHG emissions come from concrete and cement, and we're not going to stop using it anytime soon. So this is really around low carbon concrete, and that bill is actually going really well. And, super excited about that, as well as some other efforts. So happy to talk about that. Happy to talk about education. We've got a number of key education bills. 2 passed out of committee this week. Both came from San Mateo County. One is working with the community college district that will allow them to create truly free community college for some of the deserving students. There's 6,000 students who qualify for what we call the Promise Scholars Program, and they can only fund about 2,000 today. And this would allow the other 4,000 to be funded. And then the other one came to us from John Cradler, a local resident and who'd worked in education technology and in education forever, and creates a digital education equity program, which will allow regional hubs for education technology and to provide the professional development that's desperately needed in our schools right now, as we've seen, and take a big step towards closing that digital divide. Criminal justice reform is another big area of mine that I'm happy to talk about. And then, just trying to figure out ways to help the district, and working with your council on high-speed rail We know that the High Speed Rail Authority has not been really responsive to concerns. So every time I talk to them, I talk about Brisbane, and I talk about Millbrae, and looking forward to continue to engage and hold their feet to the fire so we make sure that high speed rail's potential needs 20, 30 years from now don't screw up what it needs to happen now in Brisbane today. So that's really my overview. Happy to be here and happy to take a few questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Senator Becker. I see that the mayor's in the house. So Karen, if you want to take over and lead the meeting, I can step back.
I'm not sure that my technical issues have been resolved. Good evening, Senator Becker. How are you?
Good, good. We can hear you fine.
Okay, hear it. I couldn't hear or see any of you. So please, and anybody else have questions?
I have a question, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Senator Becker, thank you very much for enumerating what you've done in your probably very busy 3.5 months. And I'm really pleased to see that you're tackling climate change. So with that in mind, knowing that we're supposed to be seeing some infrastructure money coming from Washington, is there anything that comes to mind having to do with infrastructure that you think kind of dovetails with thinking about climate change?
Yeah, I do. I do. One of the, the only way that we're going to solve these hard to serve times of day, like I mentioned. So right now, I don't know if you, apparently I'm the only one who listens to the radio, but I hear lots of radio ads about don't clean your clothes between 4 and 9 because they'll be dirtier if you do, because you're using dirty energy. Or I even saw a TV commercial along those lines the other day. So I'm not sure how effective those are, but it's sort of an attempt to do that. But the only way we're going to serve those hard to serve times, there are two things. One, really true demand response. And so companies like Ohm Connect, personal demand response, where you actually can control things in the home and people opt into those kind of programs. Or it's going to require building infrastructure, like offshore wind, for example, geothermal, long duration storage. We've got plenty of solar during the day, right? So the question is, and we've got short-term storage now, but can we get to long duration storage? All those things are jobs and a lot of infrastructure. So that's one thing for sure that I think we should do with the money that will help speed us to our climate change goals, help speed us to 100% clean energy. Right now, we're not on track for our 2030 goal, and there's no way we're going to hit even 100% even by 2045 unless we tackle those hard to serve times a day. So that's one area I'd really like to see that money invested.
Thank you.
Terry?
Just a quick question. You talked about high-speed rail and trying to keep their feet to the fire. And you said something that about 20 to 30 years down the road, is that what your anticipation is for the reality of high-speed rail for the Bay Area?
Well, in my opinion, it really should never come. High-speed rail, once we get to electrified Caltrain, I think you can go from San Francisco to San Jose in about 40 some minutes anyway, right? So I think if high-speed rail ever gets built, even the Central Valley, I think it could make sense to get it to San Jose for sure, and connect the valley that way. I spent a lot of time in the Central Valley. I was a founding trustee at UC Merced, and I could see that connection making sense. But so I think there's a real question whether it should even ever come up the peninsula. But yes, if it came up the peninsula, yeah, I can't imagine it'd be any sooner than 20 to 30 years.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Becker. So, we're all thinking about the fact that we understand that there's a place for high-speed rail, but not here. So how are you going to help us convince the people who still want to disrupt our development on the Baylands relative to high-speed rail to get us into a different perspective about that?
Yeah.
That thing.
It's a good question. We've got Nicole, my district director, on here, as I mentioned. we've had a number of conversations already with Brian Kelly and with Board. I mean, I am on the transportation committee. Lena Gonzalez, who's the chair, is a good friend. She's been sort of very supportive of my concerns so far. I've raised it every chance that I get. And I think, you and I talked about it, I think probably during the campaign. We really haven't had a chance to talk about it much since then. So I'd love to do that maybe even, as soon as next week. And
Sure.
And let's do a call with him. I mean, certainly with Boris, we should do a call, next week with Boris, right? And just like really try to pin them down. I know my team has tried to do that. I've tried to do that to some extent, but really doing that together. And then let's do a call with Brian Kelly, the CEO. Together, he's been responsive to me, but it doesn't mean I've gotten clear answers yet on this, which I haven't. So I think we're committed, and I've same thing with Milbury. I've talked to him many times about that. I made my position very clear. Again, I don't want to destroy perfectly good and needed developments today for some again potential need for high-speed rail way down the road. And again, what you've convinced me, and I've been convinced that we don't need the cleaning station there. It can be in Gilroy, doesn't have to be there. And I don't think it should. So, we're still sort of figuring all that out. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be easy, but I'd be happy to maybe do some joint calls with you. And he's been responsive to me. I think he kind of needs to be. So let's do some joint calls.
May I add one just little nuance here that I'm not sure that you have considered, but I'm just, when we're thinking about, how we're looking at the changing structure of housing and whatever, and we're thinking about, low-income housing, it's not individual housing. This is looking at what are we doing for the families. Mm-hmm. And high-speed rail is not thinking about the families. This is thinking about getting, Joe the athlete from San Jose or Gilroy to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And, the things that we're thinking about putting out on the Baylands, if we're doing, small places, we're not thinking about families. We need to be thinking about families. And I don't see that conversation in anything that is happening with high-speed rail or anything else like that. So can we really start putting that? It's like, if we're trying to solve a problem about affordable housing in the Bay Area, it's about keeping our families in the Bay Area.
Right.
Right. And I don't see that coming from Scott or any of the other people who are talking about these, one bedroom or studios or whatever we're doing. If we're going to put schools out on the Baylands, we need kids.
Right.
If we don't think about the families, we're not going to have any kids. That's my heart.
Yeah.
That's my heart. And we need to talk about that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And, Majority Leader Bob Hertzberg is really on this message, and is that, can't all be rental housing. Rental housing is great. It's great for people who build the housing and rent it out. The value really accrues to them in the long run. Part of the point of housing is getting people equity so that they can benefit from that equity. We know there's models that work. Stanford University does it. Professors, right? They pay part of the down payment and they share in the upside, and it's not rocket science. And so he's got a vision for a very large, fund for first-time home buyers. And I think it's something we need to do. It's, again, it can't just be rental housing. We need to have housing that families can afford and families can buy and own.
And what are the people have done during the pandemic? They haven't moved out of the Bay Area to high rises. All of these people, when you look at the US Postal Service, address changes, they've moved to places where they can have a small home, but they can grow some tomatoes. Mm-hmm. They're not looking at the model that we've been talking about for the last 10 years. And that's really troubling to me. And I hope you're going to embrace that idea.
Yeah. Well, again, I think we need both, right? We do need, when my wife and I were starting, we first, we rented a house, and that was a little house, a little bungalow. in College Terrace, which would be off zoning regulations now. But we would have considered certainly an apartment or something as well. But yeah, eventually we then did want to own, right? So I think we do need both, but I hear you. We got to focus on what you're talking about as well.
Super, super important for us is to focus on the families.
Yeah.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've said way too much.
No, it was good. It was good. I appreciate you hearing it. Yeah.
Cliff, I see you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, thank you, Senator Becker, for being here tonight and being open and candid about how you feel about high-speed rail. That's a major issue for us, as you can hear from the council. I have to say that I am completely in line with your train of thought, no pun intended, but, having that, having the rail yard, down in Gilroy, focusing on creating a great mixed use development in the Baylands, that creates great jobs, provides, wonderful housing opportunities, really addresses a lot of those climate change issues that you're focused on, and really just taking a common sense approach to, Caltrain is going to be electrified. You save a couple of minutes if you stayed on high-speed rail train, yet that's going to cost, crazy amounts of money, which just doesn't make sense. It's such a waste. So really glad that we're on the same page there.
Yeah, absolutely.
In regards to the Baylands, as you know, former Senator Hill, worked with the city of Brisbane, right, to hammer out a lot of those details that eventually went into Measure JJ that was voted on by the public. Mm-hmm. And, in that measure, we got the 1,800 to 2,200 housing units, up to 7 million square feet. And then, implementing our sustainability framework, which has got just great sustainability goals and aspirations. And, I'm going to put you on the hot spot here and just wanted to get your commitment.
Oop, gotta go.
Just to get your commitment on supporting the measure that was passed by our citizens and working as a partner with us to implement those goals that are in Measure JJ.
Absolutely. I really appreciate it. I know, obviously I wasn't there, but I've heard from Senator Hill and other, I know about how much work was done by you and the council and members of the community. And I think it's a great vision that we should work hard to make it a reality.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And then, Councilmember Mack, and, she talked about infrastructure, and hey, there could be, some significant money coming our way in regards to infrastructure with the bill that is, I guess, now starting to kind of, make its way through Congress. Being able to partner with you and figure out, what would be a good strategy for trying to capture some of that money. As you know, the Baylands isn't just Brisbane, part of it's in San Francisco. So we have an opportunity here to work together. It's supposed to be a bi-county development. And, someone, with your leadership, I think can really bring those different stakeholders together and really identify, okay, what's going to make the best development, not just what's going to, help one side or the other, but how do we work together to create a regional development that benefits everybody?
Yeah, I think it's great. And, Gina Pappin has been, sort of amassing some of the infrastructure projects here so we can compete and say, it's not just San Francisco with their 5 billion tunnel. It's not just, San Jose with its 5 billion Diridon station. Here's all the projects up and down the peninsula. We need, including grade separations, right? Which we know were about $11 billion if we do all the grade separations. So that's talk about infrastructure that we could build right now. We could build grade separations in Caltrain. So, but to your point about working with San Francisco, and I had thought about that specifically with regard to the Baylands, but But I think that's great. And yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity. I certainly want to position our area to get those dollars that are hopefully coming.
All right, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, one of the bills I did pass out of committee this week came to us from Belmont, but it'll apply really. It's really allowing peninsula cities to pool together team up really to compete better for SB1 dollars. This was the gas tax money. This is $3 to $4 billion a year in infrastructure spending in California, but it's hard for our small cities sometimes to compete. So this will allow our cities to team up to compete for those dollars. So that is one thing that we do have moving along too. That came up.
All right, great. Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to get back to my book club and let you guys finish your meeting. And just great to see everyone, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Senator.
Okay.
Right,
thank you.
Let's talk next week with Boris. Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks.
All right, bye.
I hope nobody minded that pun. It did come out, so that was my bad.
Oh, I laughed.
Okay. All right. I think now, I've got the weirdest things going on technically from my perspective. So I'll try and read what I've got, and you guys can help me out here. Okay.
Samten's presentation.
Yeah, I've got things looking like they're in different languages, but that's very good. So, okay. Somebody want to call it?
I'll sorry, Madam Mayor. Yeah, maybe it'll get fixed. So yeah, next up is the presentation from Samtrans.
Thank you very much.
So yeah, Reimagine Samtrans. You guys are up.
Hi, everyone. I'll just say one quick thing. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Epstein with the Government and Community Affairs team. We're super happy to be here to talk about Reimagine Samtrans, our bus planning project. And I'm just going to quickly turn this over to Jonathan, who is going to take you through a presentation we have about the project, and then happy to answer any questions you have.
Right. Thanks so much, Jessica. Hopefully you guys can all see a PowerPoint that's titled Reimagine Samtrans, what we're here to talk about this evening. So I will get started. Again, thank you for having us. We appreciate the time. Talking about the agenda that we'll go over this evening, we'll touch on the project goals and timeline. We'll introduce some alternatives that came out of the project thus far, and then talk about how the public can engage and input into this project, and then of course have time for questions. Going over our project goals, Reimagine Samtrans aims to improve the experience for our existing customers, and with those existing customers, have them ride more frequently. And we also want to add customers to our ridership. We want to build Samtrans into an efficient and effective mobility provider, even better than we're doing today in San Mateo County. Of course, with any project during this time, we have to talk about the pandemic and how we view our project moving forward while we're in the pandemic. We believe that it's more important than ever. We believe that once the pandemic, we conquer it, that new ridership is going to potentially be harder than ever before to get, with uncertainty around the market and how work landscape looks. But we believe that along with new ridership, frequent ridership is also possible. And we recognize that it's more important than ever to be efficient and effective with our resources. And one of the wonderments that we've had going through this process has effectiveness changed. And so there's some themes in the alternatives and different directions that we could go as a system. Talking about our guiding principles, what really we focused on as we were making the alternatives: customer focus. We fully recognize that we're here for our customer, and that without them, we would be nothing. So, of course, we're going to focus on them. At the same time, we want to make sure that we create a system that's deliverable by our amazing workforce. We want to make sure that it succeeds. We want it to be effective. We don't want buses out there just for the sake of having buses on the road. We want them to be a true mobility option for the residents of San Mateo County. And of course, with everything that we do, we want to make sure that we look through a social equity lens and increase equitability across the county. Talking about the project timeline quickly, we started this project in the summer of 2019 with a phase 1 public outreach in the fall and winter of 2019. And then as we were chugging along, COVID happened in the pandemic, which slowed us down. But while we were doing a very quick response to the pandemic and focusing on that, we were also able to work on these alternatives that I'll share with you this evening. After we talk about the alternatives and we get public input, we'll move into a preferred alternative, meaning that we take the feedback from the alternatives that I share and we will mold them into a design for Samtrans to be implemented. Once that's done, we'll take it to our board for adoption, and implementation of Reimagine Samtrans is set for the summer of 22. So talking about briefly how the alternatives were formed, we looked at the existing conditions of Samtrans. We looked at what's working and what's not working, and we asked the public what's working and what's not working and what can we do better. Along with that, we had a lot of market research. And with these three things, we formed the alternatives. So along with the alternatives, there's some objectives that we wanted to accomplish across all of them, regardless of how the new system looks. One is to schedule efficiently, making sure that we are maximizing our resources, making the system reliable. If we say the bus is going to be there at a certain time, it's going to be there. Make sure that we focus on equity. And make sure that we focus on efficiency, that we're maximizing, again, those resources. For example, making sure that we are putting vehicles, bus lines where people need them, and that we are creatively thinking about how to maximize the resources. Along with that, we want to make sure that we focus on connections to our neighboring agencies and to ourselves. So connections with Muni and ART, VTA, and of course, Caltrain. And we wanted to definitely look at duplication and eliminate it from the system. We don't want two buses in the same area doing the same thing, which goes along with efficiency. So now that we're at this point, the team put together a really awesome video, and the narrator has a much nicer voice than I. So I'd like to share that with you all.
Reimagine Samtrans is an exciting project to evaluate and refresh the entire Samtrans bus system. Early in the project, we held more than 60 community events and received nearly 5,000 survey responses from our riders, the public, and our bus operators. You told us how Samtrans could better meet your transportation needs. When we asked, how should we invest in better bus service? You told us your top priorities were more frequent service, better real-time bus arrival information, faster routes with fewer stops, and better connections to rail service like BART and Caltrain. Designing bus routes is all about trade-offs, and we can't do it all. We asked you how we should balance these trade-offs. Samtrans riders said they want the bus to come more often on major streets, while others want bus service to more places. Riders want service outside of traditional commute times, and riders and non-riders both said they would be willing to walk a little farther to a bus stop if the bus was faster and more direct. So what did we do next? We used everything we learned to design 3 bus network alternatives. Each of the 3 alternatives sets a different vision for the future. Alternative 1 focuses on creating a high-frequency bus network that can be used for all kinds of trips. In this alternative, 7 routes in high-demand areas would provide service every 15 minutes or better all day long. This network would bring 4 times as many people within walking distance of a high-frequency bus route compared to today. Alternative 2 improves connections to rail stations and expands access to the Bay Area region. It adds new direct routes to key BART and Caltrain stations, employment centers, and community colleges. 3 routes, including 2 express routes, would serve downtown San Francisco. Alternative 3 offers the most geographic coverage of service. In addition to keeping service around the county, this alternative expands midday and weekend service. It also includes 4 new on-demand service areas. On-demand service allows people to take trips within the coverage area, using an app or calling to book trips in real time. We want to know which network best describes your priorities. Please visit reimaginesamtrans.com or call 1-800-660-4287 to learn how each route may change and to give us your input.
So we'll go into the alternatives, a little bit more details here briefly. So alternative 1, as we talked about in the video, is a direct high frequency service. And actually, let me pause here for 1 second just to highlight something. In the 3 alternatives that you're going to hear about, they are themed and they have different trade-offs because, as we said, we can't do them all. But these are not set in stone. They're meant to solicit feedback. And the preferred alternative that in the end of this process is probably not going to be one of these alternatives, but instead a combination of maybe all 3, maybe a couple from each one. And so important to remember, nothing is set in stone at this point. We are definitely using this to get feedback and to think about what Samtrans could be. So now that I've said that, alternative 1, which is a direct high frequency service within the county, would increase frequency on several of our routes to every 15 minutes, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. It adds service to Oyster Point, but it would also mean that we would truncate our routes to stop at the county line and we no longer go into San Francisco. And then one of the things that we would continue to look at is areas with low ridership would be targeted for service reductions under the alternative. Alternative 2, which is expanded connections, really focuses on connecting to rail and our neighboring transit agencies. It expands service to connect even more with BART and Caltrain. It does add routes to Oyster Point, and it adds, or it'll have 3 routes to downtown San Francisco: Route 292, our Foster City Express, and a new express route from San Mateo to downtown San Francisco. And again, under this alternative, areas with lower ridership are targeted for reduction. Alternative 3 is a retainment of geographic service coverage, meaning that we try to have our service area cover as much of the train as possible. It would increase service on several routes during the midday and weekend service, our off-peak time. We would continue to look at improving connections to East Palo Alto, Stanford. It would introduce that microtransit zones that you saw in the video for East Palo Alto, Foster City, Millbrae, and Half Moon Bay. Fully restore the Foster City Express, and it would reduce transfers and provide more one-seat rides to key destinations. So looking at how the alternatives compare, we broke it up and kind of gave a ranking based on the 4 different areas that we want to touch: customer service, workforce delivery, effective mobility, and social equity. One of the questions that we get on this slide that I'll answer now is, which one do we think would provide the most gain in ridership? And that would be alternative 1. And you can see there it's based on the frequency and more midday and weekend service. But each one has values that we definitely want to talk about and understand where we all feel the service should go. I want to talk briefly about the ECR. It's one of our biggest routes and it serves the entire county, and what changes we could see to it under each alternative. So in alternative 1, what we would do with the ECR is split it into 2 routes. The routes would be split at the Millbrae Transit Center, and we'd have a northern portion and a southern portion. And maybe we want to work on the name so not everything's ECR, but for now we'll call it ECR North and South. The route in the northern end would operate every 10 minutes on weekdays and 15 on weekends, which would be an increase in frequency. The route in the south would operate every 15 minutes, 7 days a week, which again would be an increase in frequency, but not as much as the north. We would shorten the route, streamline it in Daly City, and we would reintroduce the ECR rapid service that was discontinued a little while ago between Redwood City and St. Bernard. Alternative 2 would be looking at keeping the route as it is a whole, but reducing the number of stops to improve the speed, this travel speed and reliability. Up to 30% of stops would be consolidated, and that would help us improve the speed on the travel time on the route by 10 to 15 minutes during peak times. Under this scenario, because of the consolidation, about 10% of the riders would need to walk a little bit further to get to a bus stop, but all riders would have that faster travel time. And again, we would streamline in Daly City to maximize efficiency. Alternative 3 would be to reschedule the route to better reflect actual travel time. So we're going to not necessarily do anything other than match the timing that we have on the route to what the traffic conditions are. Hours of service and frequency wouldn't change, but we would still have that efficiency in Daly City. And now, I'm sure what you have all been looking forward to, proposed changes in Brisbane that we felt we definitely want to highlight with you. So the Route 292, right now, it has average ridership, but it's a very long route and it makes being on time a challenge. During public input, it was suggested that on-time performance and speed, travel speed, were issues. There were also requests for more frequent service. So under alternative 1, we would add Millbury BART station to the route as a stop. There, we would split the route into 2 different routes. The northern portion of the 292 would remain the 292, but anything south of Millbury would become the 293. On the northern end, we would end at Bayshore to connect with Muni, and we would not go into downtown SF. We would increase the frequency to every 15 minutes during peak and midday, 7 days a week on the northern route. And the new route 293 would still be at 30 minutes frequency. Under alternative 2, which is the improved connections, we would keep the route on the same routing as it is today. We would look at the stops and look to place them about a half mile from each other, which would mean a consolidation. This would allow or would create fewer stops on the route, but by doing so would decrease the travel time along the route for customers, and the frequency and hours of service would stay the same. Alternative 3, which is to retain the geographic coverage, we would add add 292 to stop at Millbury BART to improve the connections there. We would operate a limited stop service. So like I talked about in alternative 2, but only in San Francisco, we would space the stops further apart at about a half a mile, and frequency and hours of service would stay the same. Talking about our community routes, there are 2 routes that we are proposing changes on, the routes 16 and 49. We are proposing actually to combine them. The reason being is that the 16 and 49, while they have ridership, they're underutilized. And so what we can do is combine the 2 routes. With that combination, it would only add 3 minutes of travel time and still would serve Terra Nova from Brisbane. But it would allow us to maximize our resources by reducing the number of buses that we need to carry the same amount of passengers. Talking about public input. So it is huge to get that public input, and we're going to really try to get it from everyone. You can visit reimaginesamtrans.com. There we have all the route alternatives if you're interested in something that maybe touches another city. I didn't capture this evening. We have some live social media events going on Fridays, Q&A session over Zoom, Insta chat, SamChat, which is an Instagram live. We're doing meetings with stakeholder groups, and we do have some in-person pop-up events that we're very excited of, and the details are on the webpage of when those will be. Then we have some virtual meetings for different parts of the county. They're listed here with the dates and time. Of course, that's on the website as well. We're doing a mid-county, coast side, South County, North County. And each of those meetings, anyone's welcome to attend, of course, but they will be focused on that portion of the county and the service changes. Finally, again, on the website, you can go to the alternatives and give us your feedback. There's a survey there that you can take. It's pretty easy to do. And of course, we encourage it. And with that, I am here for questions.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. And let's see, why don't we just open it up to council questions?
I'm here.
Oh, you're there? Okay, I wasn't sure if you're there or not, Karen. All right, cool.
Okay, so, well, I am for now, so.
All right.
You know, yeah, we should open it up to questions. You're absolutely right. Let's start with you and I last, Cliff.
Definitely.
All right, go ahead. Colleen, do you want to start?
Sure. On some of these routes where you're reducing the number of stops, and it certainly would not affect our 292 if that was preserved as is. Have you thought of using a Caltrain model where they have express trains, but they alternate express trains with regular service? So you're not just eliminating all the stops and people have to walk farther, but you alternate.
Yes, so that is in some of the alternatives. The Rapid the ECR Rapid would be a good example of that, where we offer a service that goes across the entire route of the ECR, but on limited stop. And then also we do have it on the 292 in San Francisco under one alternative, or the entire route, where it would be limited stop. Now, when we're looking at limited stop versus all the stops, there is, when you look through the system, a lot of stops that are really close together. So we're not looking to have people walk very far, right? I think that sometimes that feeling of consolidation or having people walk further feels like a big push. But for example, if the stops are half a mile from each other, then if you were smack dab in the middle of the two, you'd be walking a quarter mile to get to the bus stop. So when my team and I went through the ECR, for example, most people were walking around 0.2 of a mile to get to a bus stop after consolidation, so 1,000 feet. So to answer your question, we are looking at it on the ECR, and I think it's potentially other places, but the stops that we're looking at, just from being the person that's looking at the consolidation, it doesn't make sense to have some of the stops as close as we have them. So I think it's an efficiency that would not affect people as much as perhaps we think about when we first hear about it.
And I'd just like to put in a plug for the 292. I've ridden that a lot. And that bus many times is absolutely packed. Now, I know we're in a pandemic, but the thought of, I see all the people with luggage coming from the airport. And then one of your proposals where there would be the half-mile distance in San Francisco with the stops. I understand the problems. There's been construction in San Francisco for the past couple years that makes it really hard for the drivers. But walking a half mile in San Francisco is a long endurance run. And I see people in San Francisco getting off Samtrans at a lot of different places. So I think that would cause a really great hardship. And I hope our residents participate in this survey, because when I look at the people riding that 292 as well, they're not going to be able to walk a half a mile just by the ridership. And that is kind of a lifeline for Brisbane for some people, both people who live in the peninsula and work in the city, or vice versa. And I'm really concerned about that one proposal to eliminate going into San Francisco. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Oh, I had a question about the route going to Terra Nova.
Yeah, Route 49.
Yeah, so I know that you said that ridership has been low on that. Has that been the case like pre-pandemic? Are you seeing that mostly because of the pandemic, because I would just hate for a decision to be made that's really based around pandemic numbers when I think a lot of those riders are high school students. So I could see how that ridership could recover fairly easily versus maybe some of the other routes, not so much, because people are maybe working from home, but we know that schools are expected to come back fully in person in the fall. And so I would just hate to see like a decision made about that route based on something that is relatively what I believe to be temporary, if it's a ridership issue that's just related to pandemic, or if it's just kind of just curious if it's just this time or if it's you've not been seeing great ridership for a while.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a good clarification piece. So all of the data that we used to inform the alternatives was pre-pandemic. So, we're in a strange world right now that we will conquer and get back to normal. But no, it was ridership prior. We actually haven't been running the Route 49 until actually recently when Terra Nova started in-person instruction again. But no, so it was prior, and it's not necessarily low ridership. It's a decently used route. It's that we see two buses that do very similar, so that duplicity in the 16 and 49. And it's not exact, but let's say both of them are half full to capacity. So we're looking at combining them. So now it becomes 100% full bus, and it only adds 3 minutes of travel time. And that frees up that second bus, if you will, the resources to go somewhere else in the system. So that's what we're looking to do there, is to make a good route even better.
Okay. Terry, do you have a question? Because if you don't, I do.
I do not.
Okay. Jonathan, I want to ask a probably esoteric question about decision making. So Brisbane is a really small town. We have 4,500 people. We don't have a lot of people who are going to take a bus anywhere. We have a lot of people who would like to take the bus anywhere they can go. So if we take your profit making or your ridership numbers out of the equation, and instead we add a different metric, and that metric would be, what is the service that is provided to each community, whether it's Brisbane as a whole, South City as 20 different wholes because it's a much bigger city. And you say, what is the service that is added to each city? And for Brisbane, we have one bus, which is 100% of our service. So any change, even though the ridership might not be high, and we could increase the ridership if we could encourage people to get on the bus. But if you say to me, I'm going to reduce the 292, you are reducing 100% of our service versus, in any other town that's got a lot more people, you want to reduce the ridership by hours or whatever it is a very different metric. I'm thinking as a mathematician, I'm thinking as a science person. So any reduction in service to Brisbane is a 100% change in the one route that we have. So can we think about that metric rather than, gee, we've got ridership numbers? Because when you look at all these graphs and maps and everything of everything you're doing, this is all about profit making. And that's not what Samtrans should be about for our communities. It should be service to the communities. So anything you're doing to reduce service to Brisbane is reducing the one bus that we have, which is reducing 100% of what we have. Does that make sense? From a theoretical thought process about You know, look at all these maps. Brisbane is like the toss it to the side kind of thing because we don't have a lot of people. And that's not how I believe you should be making your decisions. Does that make sense? And I'm not trying to be a butt, but
no, to a point, I guess, and forgive me for interrupting, I guess one of the things that I would wonder about your statement is the profit making, obviously being a public entity with public funding. You know, we're not making a profit off of any of our buses. That being said, I think you were talking about resources and where we can get ridership versus what's the fair share for cities. And it's a fair question. I don't think it's one that necessarily I would be prepared to fully answer tonight, but I would talk about the two. I understand your point on the 292. I guess I'm concerned that I didn't articulate myself well enough. You know, the trade-offs on the 292, for example, I think what you're viewing as the reduction is the service being truncated and not going into San Francisco.
Well, that would be disastrous. Let me tell you why. It's not just the people from Brisbane wanting to go to San Francisco. It is the people who are coming from San Francisco to work in Brisbane. We have one bus. You're talking about reducing 100% of the service that we have for not only our residents, but what's more important, well, not more important, but what's mostly important, how on earth are we going to get people here to work? It's huge. And it's one bus to you, but it's 100% of our buses to us, right?
Well, that's a fair point.
Thank you.
That being said, what I wanted to point out as far as the reduction goes is that under the alternative, so alternative one, which would be the one that would reduce service to no longer go into San Francisco, the 292 is increasing in frequency. So I'm not arguing for or against doing the action. I'm just pointing out that what you were saying about reduction, it's true that the distance, the geographic distance gets reduced, but you have double the service frequency. I'm not saying that that's a right or wrong alternative.
Do it. If you stop people being able to come to Brisbane, you are totally hamstringing our businesses. You are hamstringing the ability of the people who are residents in Brisbane to go to work in San Francisco. Think about that for a second. It's not, I mean, I'm just being very passionate about the fact that this is not even something I can contemplate, that you would stop the people from Brisbane being able to go to work in San Francisco, or conversely, the low paid workers, and this is who we are talking about right now, being able to come to their low paid jobs at Amazon Fresh in Brisbane, because there's no other way for them to get here. And I'm not picking on you personally, but I am really feeling very passionate about the fact that this is so outrageous to my mindset.
Heard. And again, I agree with you. It's not a debate between you and I, right?
Yeah,
I just want to make sure, I guess, for everyone is that's why I think we brought the alternatives forward, is that we heard certain things, right? People want more frequency, or they want more geographic. So there's three alternatives, right? What I hear loud and clear from you is that you would prefer alternative 3, which is to not truncate the 292, to look at that geographic coverage. And that's great. And that's the feedback that we need from people, right? We don't want to make these decisions in a box or separate from the community. We want that feedback from the community, because at the end of the day, I'm here, right, serving the public in the capacity of giving them a good bus service, but I need to be told what is it that folks want. And so heard loud and clear, Mayor, and I appreciate the candor and the feedback. but you know.
And Jonathan, can I just jump in with one little thing?
Of course.
To follow up on what Jonathan's saying about, you know, the need for feedback. That's what we're doing, right? We're putting ideas out there. We're gathering feedback. So
I get it.
Yeah, well, so I'm just going
to. I want you to hear me.
Oh, I do. And I'm going to make an ask on this one because I'm the communications person, right? We really need people engaging with our website, taking our survey. So if you have any social media networks, if you have connections, if you know people in Brisbane, which I think you do, please make sure to send them reimaginesamtrans.com so that we hear from you, we hear from the residents, we hear from everyone to really, you know, hit that story home, because we have to be able to go to our board and say, hey, this alternative didn't work. This is not what Brisbane wanted. And the more people we hear from Brisbane, the better it goes.
Okay, and I want to just add one more thing. Sorry, you guys. I know I'm being very verbose here, but the people who most need what I just said to both of you are not the people who are ever going to speak up. We have to be their voices. And, you know, they're just not, you know, like the people in South San Francisco who've got their airplanes going over them, like I've got them going over me. I've got a big mouth and I'm going to speak. But the majority of people who really need these services are not the people who are going to speak up. We're going to speak up. Uh-oh, here comes Colleen. Go ahead. Yep. Colleen, you're on mute.
I'd like to just make one point dovetailing on what our mayor said. Unless you reach out to the people commuting into Brisbane from San Francisco, they're never going to do your poll. They don't even know about it.
Yeah.
And that's a huge ridership. Those are employees that our businesses depend on. How are you going to get their input when they are part of the ridership?
So are you guys reaching out to all the businesses? Because I think that's maybe a better place to be looking for feedback. I mean, if you're looking at Amazon Fresh in Brisbane, and I'm just using them as an example, because, you know, there are kids coming from San Francisco to work in Brisbane on minimum wage who don't have a big voice. Are you reaching out to those companies? I mean, I've got a big mouth and I'll talk all day long, but, you know, I'm not catching that bus that if you took it out of service means I'm unemployed.
Hey.
We do not need one more unemployed person in our county, not one.
Well, we are reaching out everywhere we can, trying to connect with anyone. Quite frankly, if you have a business list to send our information to, that would be great. You know, we don't know everyone, and we are doing a large scale marketing campaign too. So people all over the region should be hearing about this. And we also hear you. And, you know, that's why we go to city councils. You are the elected representatives. You have a big microphone. So it's really important for us to get this feedback from you. I've learned a lot about Brisbane today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And just, if I could just add on, forgive me, but since I planned some of them, I'm very proud and passionate about them. But we are doing those pop-up events across the communities, and we've thought really hard, especially in the pandemic now, of where to find those voices, like you were talking about, Mayor and Councillor. And we understand that they're not just necessarily going to come to us. So we're trying to hit up farmers markets, bus stops. We are doing we're working with the Cow Palace when they distribute food to be there and to talk to people. So if there's any group like that or any location that you all know of that we should staff, I'm really passionate about getting out there. And I completely agree with you that we need to hear voices. And it's great to hear from elected officials. We really appreciate your feedback, but I also like to be with the folks that are riding the bus. And so, or we'll ride the bus again once the pandemic's done. So please let us know.
Sure, Madison, you got some comments on this?
Sorry, my mouse wasn't cooperating. I'm like trying to move it to unmute and it's going like all the places I don't want it to go. No, I just already asked my question, and I don't feel like I know enough about each bus service to at this point to make a judgment, but it does sound like, you know, I have heard some concerns over the 292, and it does sound like there's an alternative that preserves that in kind of the way that it has been. So my concern is just making sure that, you know, we have accessibility to the places that our residents need to go, and that's absolutely into the city, and it's also to Terra Nova. And so as long as you guys are really taking note of that, I think the big problem here is that, as Karen's been mentioning, we are so small, and so oftentimes we get overlooked. And I think this reaction comes from, we always have to like fight really hard, I think, to be heard. And there's so many bigger cities who I just feel like get so much of the resources in the spotlight, and their opinions are taken into consideration because of their size, I think, quite frankly, more than Brisbane's is. And so when we see things like this that are threatening what little resources we do have potentially, we're just ready to get up in arms about that. So I think it sounds like you guys have kind of heard what is important to us. And I would definitely echo that. As long as we can, you know, preserve the routes that Brisbane is utilizing and potentially enhance them is great. But I think any reduction, you know, in stops could really harm us in the long run. So thank you for being open to our feedback.
And one more question, one more comment, I'm sorry. So we've got a daytime population of 4,500 people. I mean, a nighttime population of 4,500 people, but we've got a daytime population of up to 30,000 people. How do they get here? We've got one bus.
I got a couple questions, Madam Mayor, if I may.
Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you. An excellent, excellent discussion, Madam Mayor. I mean, that is, you hit the nail right on the head. You know, so yeah, my first question is that, so with the alternative one, we're limiting the service at the, you know, to the county border, right? We're not going into San Francisco, but yet the ECR goes down to Palo Alto. So if you can explain that, why that route goes into Santa Clara County, but the 292 doesn't go into San Francisco County.
Yeah, understood. So I believe that we stop right at the border, right, of Santa Clara County. So the ECR goes all the way down
Palo Alto. Palo Alto is not in San Mateo County, last I heard.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I believe that the transit center we go to is right over the border into Santa Clara County.
Okay, I wasn't sure. So it doesn't go to downtown Palo Alto or whatever. So it just goes right at the border with Menlo Park.
Yeah, and connects. You would take VTA to go further into Santa Clara County. It's similar to the northern end. You know, it stops at Daly City BART. It goes just slightly further than Daly City BART to connect with Muni. But yeah, I hopefully that answers your
okay,
question.
yeah, you know what? I'm trying to just get an understanding of it. So, you know, I like that, you know, with the alternative one, there are the more frequent stops, right? So you're increasing the service, yet it's not going into San Francisco, which is, you know, a huge hardship that has been talked about by our council and by some of our residents too, some of the feedback that you have received. So, you know, I mean, sometimes, you know, you get this feedback and yeah, you take it in, but then maybe, you know, you still move forward with your kind of vision because that's what you think for the overall system is the way to go. And there's just, unfortunately, you know, these casualties, you know, to small communities like ours. You know, if you were to move forward with alternative one, I mean, you'd have to have an extremely just like in sync system with Muni, right? I mean, you know, if you're going to get off that Samtran bus, you got to immediately like get onto the Muni bus that's going to continue to wherever that Samtran bus was going to go. So kind of, talk that through. What would be that experience, if alternative one was the preferred way to go with Samtrans?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we recognize that. We also recognize that there is some work to be done on agreements on fares, right? So one of the things that we're also engaged in regionally is a fare integration study. So yeah, understood. And we definitely try to think each process through carefully. And I guess my individual plug is that I hear small town. I was born in a very, very small town up north. And I worked in Brisbane for a while, a couple of years ago. So I know I won't say I know the community, but I understand what you're saying. And definitely hear it. So happy to be an advocate and understand.
No, so yeah, so what I'm talking about is the seamless, as much as possible, transition from Samtrans to Muni. So if that Brisbane resident gets on the bus, they go up to the border, they get off the bus, then they pay another fare to get on Muni. So as right now, they would just pay the one fare on Samtrans. And so how much of an increase is that in cost if things just stayed the way that they are right now? If you got off the bus and got on a Muni compared to if you just stayed on the bus on 292 into the city?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that there's a couple choices. I know in Clipper, I believe that there is a discount, but I think that Muni's fare is $2.25. So you're looking at around $4.50 additional a day. But I'll say it's a recognized problem across the region, right? Is this fare and connecting bus to bus. So it's not something where we would take that lightly or not try to engage on that problem. One of the things that we're doing outside of Reimagine is looking at fare integration across the system. So like Muni to Samtrans, et cetera, and getting some kind of agreements in place to where we don't have that situation, right? We should not operate in a bubble, right? As a transit system saying, my person, right, that rides Samtrans wants to go downtown, but in order to do that trip, they have to pay double. Like, in my opinion, doesn't perfectly make sense. So I forgive me for being long-winded. What I'm saying is that we're working on both and we recognize that.
Okay. All right. So no, I'm glad that you're bringing this to light. So, perhaps, as a suggestion is that the 292 doesn't get dismantled, how it's being shown in an alternative one until there's, some kind of an agreement with Muni so that people aren't paying double the fare and, because you just think about it, right? I mean, if you were to move forward with that, and then the little guy got screwed because trying to quote unquote do efficiency, then that's not right. So if you want to do this system and you feel like this is the way to go, then you got to work it out first before you move forward with changing that route.
Yep. Understood. And again, I want to make sure that it's clear that we don't, Samtrans does not have a sponsored alternative in this race, right? We came up with free. So I think when you said efficiency, that's one of the things I talked about in our goals, especially with the pandemic and thinking about what efficiency is. Alternative 3, like we talked about, is more one-seat rides, more geographic coverage. So is that being more efficient, right? Is it that we provide the bus going a further distance, maybe a little bit slower, but it gets somebody there without having to transfer a bus. So
yeah,
there's many different pathways, right, to a good system. And so I'm glad that it has solicited feedback. That's definitely what we need. And then, again, all these alternatives are not set in stone. It'll be in the end, a combination after all the feedback.
All right. Do you think, just there could be a possibility where you'd have the 292 and the 293, but the 292 still went into the city?
Yes, potentially.
Right. So you could take all those benefits of additional frequency, and so that could be it. All right.
I was just going to say that's the only one. So it's potential. I'm not saying it's possible without other trade-offs to increase the frequency, but like the split and some of the stop reduction, which I'm a fan of. When you get into the weeds on some of our routes, like some of our stops just don't make sense, right? One block away from each other. And if we can speed up the route that way, rather than truncate it, great. And so, yes, there's always a possibility. Can I tell you that for sure what that would look like, what the trade-offs would be tonight? No.
I know, I totally understand that, but I'm just thinking, like, if you're on the 293, you get the transfer to the 292, right? There's no additional cost there, and then you ride into the city.
Right. Yeah.
So, okay, so you will look at that alternative that I just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. As the operations planning guy, I'm a fan of shorter routes, meaning like breaking them up, because it's easier for us to work on the on-time performance, the reliability that way. So I hear what you're saying, and yes, it's a possibility, and I will look into it.
All right, great. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments? Colleen? Terry? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
I hope we've given you some huge amounts of thought, food for thought.
Yes, thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you.
We really appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's great. We are very focused on Brisbane.
Yeah,
thank you
so thank you for your dedication too.
We appreciate it too. Thanks. Good night.
Good night. Take care.
Good night. Okay. Thank you, everybody. All right. So moving on to oral communication.
We have a hand raised. Oh, the hand went down. We had a hand raised from.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's back up.
Okay. All right. I don't see it.
Madam Mayor, Michelle Salmon would like to make public comment.
Thank you. Michelle, go ahead.
I'd just like to say that every time you have to change a bus, or every time, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Every time you have to change a mode of transportation, trying to use public transit on your way to work or from work, the likelihood of you doing it becomes less and less. And I think that the timing of them doing this while many people are forced to work at home is pretty egregious. And I used to commute on the 7B daily. And, if you have to, like many people say, well, Michelle, why don't you take the shuttle and take BART? It's cheaper, because I was working downtown. I said, it's cheaper, but it's horrific to have to change modes of transportation on your way to work. I tried doing it to Walnut Creek. It was 4 modes of transportation each way. That's not feasible for public transportation. And, we're going to get high-speed rail, but that's not going to stop at Brisbane. So what are people supposed to do? So thank you for fighting for our bus. And I don't think you should have to transfer from the 292 to get downtown San Francisco. So, the transportation agencies need to work it out. We need to put pressure on them about that. We have a lot of workforce that needs to use the public transportation, including the bus. And every time you get off the bus and get on a different bus, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and you're exposed to weather and crime and all kinds of other things. It's just not feasible. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you. I'm sorry. Anybody else needs to speak? Ingrid?
I have received no further communication, and I don't see any further hand raised.
Thanks, Ingrid. Okay, so now moving on to item 5, oral communications number 1. Do we have anybody who would like to speak on an item that is not on the current agenda? Do we have any emails? Do we have any texts? Do we have any hands raised? Do we have anybody who would like to speak?
I have Michelle Salmon wishing to make public comment during oral communications number 1.
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, or did you make your point just now?
It's not on the agenda, but I do want to raise the issue again. and again and again. With the recent winds, I noticed that the Brisbane Soils Processing and the Baylands and the soil storage are not doing their watering. The dust, the fugitive dust has been egregious. We went up Tunnel Road the other day, and the dust coming off of the Baylands, in particular the parking lots, was, you know, like you felt like you were in the Sahara during a dust storm. And then coming back around and coming down Bayshore Freeway, it was blowing off of the soils processing area like crazy. And they were just merrily going along, you know, without watering or anything. So where's the enforcement? I've called Bay Area Air Quality Control Management so many times that I'm on a first name basis with Dick, who was assigned to Brisbane. So why isn't Brisbane helping to enforce this? This is a health hazard that is high, that is coming from a repeat offender. So I'd really like the city to take some action on this. And just because we're in COVID and just because we're, you know, working with the Baylands for development doesn't mean we could ignore the rules about fugitive dust. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Anybody else? Ingrid?
I have no further written comments or members of the public wishing to speak.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6, the consent calendar. See, approve the minutes of the City Council meeting of March 18th, 2021.
So that item was pulled by staff. You weren't here during that portion of it. I would like to approve item E and F, or make a motion to approve, and I'd like to have a brief discussion on item D.
Thank you. Second on.
So moved.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz?
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin?
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell?
Aye.
And Mayor Cunningham?
Aye. And let's have a conversation about the items that Terry has pulled from the agenda.
On item D, I just have a quick question on the dog park resurfacing. And in the pricing agreement attachment 2, which is page 33, it basically states that this request for proposal, this contract is to install the turf, and that if the area is not prepped for installation, there'll be a remobilization fee of $2,500. To me, it looked like the request for proposal included some grading that the contractor would need to do, and I don't see that included in the pricing agreement. So I'd like a question to staff that is included in this pricing agreement.
You are absolutely correct. It is included in their scope of work that they are required to complete the grading.
But it doesn't say that on the pricing agreement. It just says to install, they will be layout, trimming, seaming, and attaching of the product, and that's it. And cleanup.
Yeah, I see what you're referencing. And I did speak with the representative from Forever Lawn regarding that notation regarding area preparation and what that was insinuating. And he clarified for me that that's just general language that they include in their bid proposals, especially specifically referencing projects that have multiple contractors or additional layers of work to be completed on site. But because this is a sole contractor that would be completing the full scope of work, it's really not, it's not specific to our project. It's not relative to our project.
I think grading is relative to our project, and I would want to make sure that that's included in this before I made any approval of it.
No, I'm sorry if I misspoke. The grading is included. What I was referencing is not relative to the project, is the notation regarding the site preparation beforehand being the responsibility of others. They would be fully responsible for grading and preparing the site prior to design and construction.
And that should be in the pricing agreement.
Right.
And that would need to be in it before I would give my approval.
Okay.
Elaine.
Noreen, I also have a question because the second page of the pricing agreement, they say a dumpster or receptor for project waste. Why are we providing that?
Yeah, that's something that they included as an ask for the city, but we could require that of them to provide that for themselves.
My concern there is that if they have minimal amount of soil to dispose of, they may consider that the waste receptacle for unused soil when they're supposed to be hauling that off as part of the project.
Right.
Thank you.
That's a good point. We can include that in our agreement with them as well.
Madison, Cliff.
Yeah, thank you. So Tom, I have a question for you. Council members O'Connell and Mackin, made 2 points. If we were to address those points in, tonight, could we then, make a motion to approve on those conditions?
You can make a motion to approve with conditions. Yes, it's before the council. The short answer is yes. I'd be a little hesitant if you got pretty far afield of what's before you in that agreement, because then there's a question about whether or not it is properly agendized. But from the two that I've heard, yeah, I have no concern at all.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
So unless there's other questions, with the addition that the grading would be the responsibility of the contractor, and the disposal would be only for trimmed waste, I would make a motion to approve.
Second.
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry, there is a hand raised from one of the attendees.
May I ask one question before you go to public? Noreen, the two references, I know you sounded exactly like you knew exactly where they were and what they were. We don't need to use sites. You've got them in front of you, correct?
That's correct.
All right, yes. Thank you. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Ingrid.
Hello, the member of the public, it looks like your name is not on there. It says guest. You're now able to speak.
Sorry, Ingrid, it's me, Barbara Abel. I guess I didn't fill in my name at the beginning. When we originally talked about this, I requested that you select a vendor with a take-back program, or at least some sort of recyclable product. And I admit I had to go through this kind of fast, among other things today, but I did not see anything about that in there. It's an awful lot of petroleum product that you're investing in. And I think the city of Brisbane, as a environmental responsibility agent, we're trying to do our best here. Really need to make sure that this material has some place to go once it's used its useful life. And please tell me I just missed it. I would really hate to think that it was simply not considered. Thank you very much.
Any comments?
I can't imagine what a secondary use for used decrepit dog turf would be besides landfill. But I do know that when we originally talked about this, Noreen talked about what the lifespan of this material is supposed to be. And maybe she can remind us of what that lifespan is, but I don't know there's any recycling of this product.
Noreen?
Yeah, I believe the lifespan is about 10 to 15 years.
And do we know if this is made from a recycled product, or do we have any idea of that?
Off the top of my head, I'm not certain that it's fully recyclable. I would be inclined to say that it's not. I do know that this type of surfacing does not have infill, which makes it a little bit more environmentally friendly. But again, as you mentioned, I'm not sure what type of secondary use would be appropriate for something like this.
Madam Mayor, we have another hand from Barbara Ebel.
Thanks. Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't was going to go on and have another life in somebody else's lawn, but I have read online that there is stuff that can be scrapped and reused. I think they even grind it up for the rubber mix for playgrounds or something. So it can be reclaimed to some degree. That's all. I just wanted to clarify that because there seemed to be some confusion about what I was asking. Thank you.
Okay, that probably would have been a good conversation to have about a year ago, but hopefully we have that resolved. Is there any other comments or questions, concerns, or can we make a motion to approve this item?
Again, I would make the motion to approve
Thanks.
with the conditions added.
Thank you.
And I'll second.
Thank you. Ingrid, roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz?
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin?
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell?
Aye.
And Mayor Cunningham.
Thank you. Aye.
And Honorable Mayor, in regards to item C for the consent calendar, I just wanted to amend the March 18, 2021 draft minutes. I was contacted by the commenter to represent her comments correctly regarding the Crocker Park Trail. I will amend the comment accordingly.
My apologies for missing that. Thank you.
If you want clarification, that's regarding Kim Follian's comment that regarding the kids not benefiting from an outdoor classroom. Littman already has an outdoor classroom, so another outdoor classroom is not needed. Children do not really care to be lectured to in a class during their free time and would prefer active recreation on the trail. That's how I would edit the comments.
Thank you. My apologies for missing that.
So are you asking to pull that and bring it back to our next meeting? I thought that was what happened at the beginning. Because we did not approve it in the minutes.
Yes, would it be possible to approve as amended?
So moved.
Do we need to amend the motion for the agenda?
All right, let me go back.
We've had two. We've ended up having two motions on the same item on the minutes just because of the technical difficulties. What I think Councilmember O'Connell is absolutely right. We should just clarify. So one is both motions removed this item from consent. So you don't have to worry about that. It's now off consent. The motions were consistent. But if there's going to be a new action on this item, I would suggest it be very specific as Councilmember O'Connell was suggesting, so that there's no confusion to the public about what's happening.
So the new motion would be, Terry, do you want to make that new motion?
No, actually, my question was when we adopted the agenda for the evening, we pulled item C. I thought we pulled it from the agenda.
We pulled it for discussion.
Oh, that was not my understanding, but that's okay.
Yeah,
that's the confusion that I think existed, the way the two were worded. I was, why don't we just clean it up, because there were two separate motions making the same point, separated by time because of the technical difficulties, and the wording was different. I was thinking people will be on the same page, but we're not. So I would suggest that you make a new motion on the consent calendar. It's basically a substitute motion, and be specific as to why you're withdrawing this item so that you can hear it tonight, because I think there is room for confusion based on the two current motions. So I would substitute the two current motions and then make your motion.
Oh, thanks, Tom.
I'll let
I know
somebody else do
that
it.
was real.
I'm done.
Okay, so I'll start.
Somebody else do it.
I will start.
As
will
Clark
start.
would say, that was clear as mud, Tom. Thank you.
I will start. Whoever is making a motion on whether this item should be heard, as the clerk is requesting, should start by saying I'd like to substitute the two earlier motions on consent agenda to pull this item for discussion by staff, or discussion and presentation by staff this evening. That's all you have to say.
Really?
I'm not.
Okay,
I think we should hear the next one.
Okay, yeah. So Tom, I mean, so the reason we got an issue here is because it was pulled in the adoption of the agenda, rather than when we got to the consent calendar, someone made a motion, hey, can I pull item C, and then can we approve all the rest? Is that correct?
It's 90%. It's close enough. Yes,
Okay.
there were two separate motions, and that's what the gap is.
Okay, so if I made a motion to reinstate item C into the consent calendar so that we can vote on it, that would be my motion. That'd be good.
If you reinstate it into the consent calendar, but pull it for discussion, yes, that's good.
Okay, that is my motion.
Second.
How can something be so simple be so complicated?
It was the gap in time. It was the gap in time.
Okay, roll call vote on the motion from Councilmember Cliff Lance and the second from Madison Davis. Is that okay, Tom?
Yes.
For item C.
Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz.
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin.
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell.
I'm going to abstain.
Mayor Cunningham.
Aye.
All right, and then I'll make a motion to amend the minutes as said by City Clerk Padilla in regards to Kim Polian's comment.
Second.
There hasn't been an opportunity for public discussion, if there is any. Does anybody come in, Ingrid? We're taking a new action.
There are no members of the public wishing to make public comment, and I have received no correspondences.
Didn't you receive correspondence from the person who wanted to amend the minutes?
Yes, but it was addressed not to the council, but to me. The request was made to me.
Okay.
So we do. You can. You don't have to remake the motion. I think it's clear there was. I was just interrupting to make sure there wasn't anybody pending asking to comment.
Okay, we're good.
You need to vote on it.
Yes.
Okay, Ingrid.
So I got the motion from Councilmember Lenz, and the second was from
Madison Davis.
Councilmember Davis.
Thank you.
Okay, roll call. Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember Lenz.
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin.
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
And Mayor Cunningham.
Aye. Okay, are we good? Thank you.
Thank you.
The most simple things can get so complicated. Okay, so moving on to item 7, I think. Are we there now? I'm not confused about that. Old business, item G, consider approval of environmental technical studies for Crocker Trail resurfacing. It is being recommended to approve a supplemental appropriation in the amount of $65,000 from the general fund for the required technical studies for Crocker Trail resurfacing. Staff report, please.
Well, Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem and council members, good evening. This staff report is going to be handled by Assistant Engineer Justin Yoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. Last year in 2020, when the Crocker Trail Master Plan was being developed, our consultant recommended the use of a material called crusher fines, which we estimate to be about half as expensive as the original proposed stabilized decomposed granite for the project. And so these cost savings opened up the opportunity to potentially include some additional improvements, additional elements to the original project scope, consistent with the master plan. However, these proposed improvements do require some subsurface excavation work, so that things like light structures and signs can be installed. Caltrans determined that the former use of the trail as a railroad spur and its location in Guadalupe Valley may pose some environmental concerns because there is the potential for subsurface chemicals to be present, and the potential for artifacts from historical Native American settlement to be present, which could potentially impact that excavation work for those additional improvements. So in order to receive environmental clearance, we are being required to prepare 2 technical studies, one of them being a combined phase 1 and 2 environmental site assessment, and the other being an archaeological survey. So therefore, we're requesting a supplemental appropriation of $65,000 for consultant fees to complete these studies. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thanks, Justin. Terry.
So when I read through this report, I think I might have had it a little bit wrong. I was thinking that Caltrans was requiring the additional studies just because of the work, not because of additional amenities that we were going to be adding. So do we really feel that the additional amenities are needed? And if they don't do the additional amenities, would we not be required to add this extra $65,000 in and do the technical studies?
Randy, who would you like to answer that?
I think I'm going to jump in and give Justin a hand here on this one.
Okay.
So Councilmember O'Connell, when we originally put this project together and with the type of material we designed it for, we thought the number was going to be $1 million. But later on, in consultation with the consultant that did the master plan for Crocker Trail, they introduced us to a different material that we could substitute and save approximately $300,000. So what we are now proposing to do is use that $300,000 to put the lighting out there, which requires the excavation, and to do some of the walkway crossing there. So the alternative is we don't have to do this study. We don't have to authorize this $65,000, but we will end up with approximately $300,000 of grant that will be it will not be underutilized. It won't be utilized at all. We'll be giving it back to the federal government. So if we spend the $65,000 and get it approved, we'll be able to expend the full amount of the grant, which will include the surface improvement of the trail, the lighting, and the walkway improvements.
Because the grant funds can only be used for construction, not for these types of studies or design.
Karen, I didn't hear what you said. Can you repeat that?
I'm
please?
sorry, those grant funds may only be used for construction, not for these types of studies or for design phase work.
Okay, thank you.
Colleen.
So I'm a little nervous about this potential for subsurface hazardous materials when we know that railroads use all kinds of things like creosote on railroad ties. So my concern is we spend $65,000 and then what if we have a remediation cost?
Yeah, that is always a possibility. You know, it's difficult to say at this point before we actually do the study, but if we do the studies, the site assessment and the archaeological, and if they find, you know, evidence of contamination or historical artifacts, you know, there is a chance that additional environmental mitigations, you know, we'll be required to comply with, and that could also have an effect on the project schedule, and issues with being able to spend the money in time. So you know, it's hard to say at this point. You know, it's always a possibility, but the fact that it has already been utilized as a trail, and that it's in a developed area as opposed to building on, you know, virgin land, you know, it's, who knows, it might end up being okay. And
so Justin, stop for a minute. Let me jump in here, because I understand what the council member is saying for the concern, but here's the reality. If we find limited areas where that happens, we just won't do the underground improvements there.
Okay.
Because right now we don't have to do the underground improvements because we're just doing surface work, and that's what we would do there. There would be patches. Now, if it's endemic, if it's throughout the whole area, your concern is very well founded. I don't think that's going to be the case. Are there going to be some trace elements? Probably, but that's been, how many years has it been since that has been used as a spur? 40 years. So it's all of the ties were removed. I don't think it's going to rise to the level we're going to have a problem.
Okay.
Cliff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, Randy, I just want to kind of get that clarification. So basically, you're digging some holes for the lighting and the signs, right?
Exactly.
That's all it is.
That is exactly it. And yeah, it's you know,
65K to dig holes and make sure that nothing's.
I'll be honest with you. I'm a lot more concerned about finding an archaeological issue in a certain area.
Yeah,
I
know.
You know, that was a creek. There were Native Americans that were living there. Is it possible that we find a midden or something on either side of it? And that's what I was discussing with Karen Kinzer earlier this morning. Is that if that's the case, we just avoid the midden. We don't excavate around the midden. Let the midden be in peace.
Absolutely. No, I think that totally makes sense. So yeah, you know, this utilized crusher fines. Mm-hmm. So what's the difference between the granite and these fines?
I'm going to defer to Karen on that.
Yeah. So well, you want me to handle this one?
You're doing good, Justin.
Yeah. Thank you. So the main difference between the two materials has to do with the shape of the particles themselves, because the crusher fines, those are sort of like the byproducts. Those are really fine rock materials, the byproducts of rock crushing operations. And so those particles tend to be angular in shape, so they interlock pretty well with compaction. Whereas with the stabilized decomposed granite, those are granite particles that have a different shape that require a chemical stabilizing agent to hold the particles together. So the reason the crusher fines are less expensive is because not only do you not need the stabilizing agent, but they're also more widely available because they come, you know, from quarries all over the area, whereas granite comes from very specific places in California. And so some of that extra cost also has to do with transporting the material.
And I guess with the not using the stabilizers, then that product has a longer shelf life without having to smooth it, you know, in years out.
Well,
it stays together.
Yeah, I mean, so there's with any material we put out there, there's going to be regular maintenance requirements, you know, compaction and stabilizing and things like that. So my understanding is the maintenance requirements are relatively similar. It's just the construction costs are and the methods are different.
Okay, all right. Yeah, thank you for bringing this to the council's attention and perhaps potential opportunity to provide more amenities that were addressed by the public in the master plan workshops.
Thank you so much for seeing that, sir, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. I mean, this is a significant amount of extra work for staff as we're trying to put this together, but we had the grant, we had the advantage of a master plan for the trail. We saw that we had an advantage for savings. In our minds, it's like, it wouldn't be good business on our part if we didn't bring this to you and tell you that we can do this and we can expend all this money and make it a much better thing than we thought it was even going to be after this grant.
Yeah, no, I'm super stoked that there's this potential money to be used that you know, is not coming out of some other, you know, pocket money, you know, like say the general plan. So thank you.
Madison?
I don't have any questions. I'm good with the proposal.
Okay, I just have an ignorant question relative to, okay, so we need to dig some holes to put in some poles, to put in some lighting. That's gonna trigger potential issues?
Yes, ma'am. Welcome to NEPA and CEQA. Welcome to the environmental law of the state and the federal government, yes.
So we've been on these trails and we've been doing stuff on these trails for the longest time. So what if we just don't put any signs and we don't put any lighting in?
Well, that is the option. That is the fallback option. But the problem is if we don't do that, we are going to have 300,000 left over in the grant that we don't have anything to spend it on. And so it's just going to go back to the federal government.
So if I may, Madam Mayor, so Randy, so we invest $65,000 from, say, the general fund, and then in return we get to keep the $300,000 that we got from the grant to use for amenities. So in the end, it's like a $235,000 windfall for the city.
Yeah, I see it as a 5-to-1 leveraging. You know, you're getting 5 times back the money you put into it.
Okay.
So do we have to dig these holes and put these lights in? I mean, that confuses me a little bit.
I'm sorry, man. I'm not clear what's the confusion. Well, I mean, if you don't want lights on the trail, then you don't have to dig the holes and we don't have to do the study. But if there's a desire to have some lighting along the trail at some point in time, now would be an opportunity for you to get it using the federal government's money to put it in instead of the city's money.
I think she's asking whether the grant is only to put in lighting and signage, or if the grant is also including the street crossing enhancements, because I have a similar question is, if you don't do the lighting and signage, could you still use the grant for street crossing enhancements?
With lighting.
With lighting.
I'm getting a little lost here, I gotta admit, but you could use the grant for all 3 of those things, but because we're doing the excavation and we're gonna be close to the trail, Caltrans is gonna make us do these additional studies.
In any case, yeah.
Yes.
And then, you know, in regards to the lighting, I mean, that is something that a lot of the community members said that they wanted, right? To make sure that the trail is safe. I mean, granted, we're going to use the type of lighting that doesn't increase the light pollution, but it does make the trail safe. And I guess if we're going to do that type of excavation, it makes sense to do it at the same time you're constructing the trail itself, correct?
It's more logical to do it that way. And we did hear, I see Noreen's still on, I don't know if she wants to comment, but I thought we heard quite clearly from study participants for the Crocker Trail Master Plan that that's what they wanted. They wanted more lighting out there. People were concerned about using it in its current condition at night.
I kind of beg to differ with you, because the last conversation we had, we talked about having hours dawn to dusk. And if you're going till dusk, you don't have lighting. So there were a couple people that had chimed in and said they might want to be there after dark. And so what I had read in this plan is that there could be motion detectors to actuate the lighting rather than lighting just being on all night. So I'm unclear what the final plan is on lighting. I'd like someone to clarify that.
They're both lights, ma'am. I mean, whether you have them motion activated or whether you have them on all the time, they're still both lights. They still have to be excavated to be installed so you can run power.
No, I'm totally clear on that. I'm asking a different question.
What's the question then, ma'am? I'm sorry.
Whether the lighting is being designed to be on all the time after dark, or whether it's motion actuated to come on after dark.
We haven't made that determination yet.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions, or shall we move on with this? Terry?
Public comment, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Terry. Ingrid?
There are, I don't see no hands up with the attendees, and I have received, oops, here we go. We have one hand up, Michelle Salmon.
Is there, my question, is there any indication that there are any archaeological resources? And have you gone to a certified archaeologist that's able to search the record to see if there's any indication of that along the trail?
That's what will be done in the studies that are proposed.
Yes.
Staff has not done that independently. That's why we're hiring a consultant. That's what they do for a living.
Well, you indicated in your conversation that there was a particular area you were concerned about.
Right. No, that was just me opining off the top of my head. It's not uncommon that when you've got a river running through a valley that you find, housing or where people lived and existed on during that time. But I don't know where those are. I wasn't here a couple hundred years ago, so we actually do need the archaeologists to go through to consult with the Native Americans to go through their libraries and such.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ingrid, anybody else?
I see no further hands.
Okay, then can I get a first and a second to approve the technological study for Crockpot Trail?
I will make that motion.
Second.
Okay, first from Terry, second from Councilmember Madison Davis. Sorry, Colleen and Cliff, you were too slow.
That's all right.
Okay, roll call vote, please.
Roll call vote. Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz?
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin?
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell?
Aye.
Mayor Cunningham?
Aye. And sorry we get a little pedantic sometimes, people, for watching, but the details are super important. Okay, just want to say that. Okay, moving on to item 9, staff reports. City manager report on upcoming activities, please.
Madam Mayor, we have item H.
We do? I missed something, sorry. Oh, I did. My apologies, everybody. I just skipped right over that for some reason. Backtrack. Item H, new business. Consider adoption of the very important thing that I was just about to overlook. The urgency ordinance number 661 concerning the removal of invasive species, waste material, and combustible vegetation, and requiring fire breaks on unimproved properties. Staff report, please.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Barry Bierman, Deputy Fire Chief with North County Fire Authority. So I bring before you this urgency ordinance that we're trying to pass tonight, and we have a PowerPoint presentation that will kind of go through what we're looking at and why. And a couple weeks ago, we put together a subcommittee of some council members and city employee staff and North County Fire Authority personnel to look at some of the things we can do in Brisbane to better ensure fire safety for residents. And so that's where we're at right now. So we'll go ahead and start the PowerPoint. Let me adjust my screen here. So chapter 15.44 is where the fire prevention code sits. Next slide. So we're looking at amending section 15.44.120, which is the removal of waste material and combustible vegetation, looking at removal of invasive species that may be in this area. And we added distinctive language such as brush. Vines are also defined now as blackberry vines, which are what we're looking at wanting to remove. They are flammable, and they have a lot of dead material in them. They can burn quite rapidly. So we'll talk about the definitions and exemptions. So we put language in the ordinance, well-maintained. If someone has well-maintained vegetation on their property, then this would be exempt of that. Basically, it does not provide a means of rapidly transmitting fire from nearby trees or vegetation. It's pruned periodically. It's not dead or dying, and that would fall under the well-maintained verbiage. So persons is defined in the ordinance. It's a property or landowner, even if the land is open acreage or currently undeveloped. And the city of Brisbane will not be, is not a person for the purpose of this ordinance. So we're looking at crosscuts. Crosscuts, and we've used those before in separating large parcels. It's just that these crosscuts will be larger as well as a perimeter. So it's a fire suppression tactic that we'll use to separate the parcel if it's large, and they would be required to be put in through the middle of some of these larger properties. It provides an area of reduced fuel loading, which will reduce the intensity of the fire by having a large break. Serves of a line that can be backburned if needed to contain it at the perimeter of where this crosscut is put in. Undeveloped properties will need a 100-foot clearance around all the property lines. And that's the change from before. It was 30 feet, and the developed properties in the hilly areas. So it's still 30-foot clearance for properties that have buildings on them, but we're talking about the undeveloped parcels. So less than 2 acres, we're increasing it from what was 30-foot clearance to 100-foot around the perimeter. Really, we went after the light flashy fuels, not removing brush and smaller trees and stuff. So we define that in this current updated ordinance that we want all vegetation removed that can carry fire. Trees will be limbed up in that area to make sure they have nothing closer than 6 feet to the ground of the branches. The dead trees are to be removed, and any smaller trees under 6 feet are to be removed entirely. So for everything above 2 acres, again, 100-foot clearance all the way around the perimeter of the property lines, 100-foot crosscut break so that no parcel is greater than 3 acres without being crosscut. Again, so all parcels should have a perimeter of 3 acres or less inside it. The dead or dying grass is to be cut within 4 inches of the ground, and the brush is to be removed and cut within several inches of the surface. Site activity permit required from the county for the work in the Sam Brew Mountain Habitat Conservation Plan. Trees that are 10 feet or taller will be limbed up 6 feet above the surface. And again, if they're under 6 feet in the treated area, they need to be removed. The fire chief or the designee may have different requirements due to the terrain or environmental concerns. So we don't want to go out there and remove all the vegetation on the side of a steep slope that could have further problems with slides, etc., or if there's sensitive plant species, etc., that we would have to work around, and that is can be modified through the chief. So now getting into some of the characteristics of what we're trying to remove. So the highly flammable plants, obviously dry, dead leaves, twigs, etc. We'll want all that removed. Abundant, dense foliage, where you have continual fuels, the high oil resin, including the gums, your eucalyptus, etc. And then needle-like or very fine needles are to be removed. Oops, and there we go, eucalyptus, okay. So again, eucalyptus burn very, very hot. They have a lot of fuels and stuff that are at the base of the trees that carry fire very well. So it's important that stuff, the trees are limbed up so those fuels are not close to the ground in the event of a fire to run up into the trees, and that all of the accumulation under the trees that's in these clear-cut areas is removed. You have your brooms, the French, Spanish, Scotch brooms. They are an invasive plant, and they are also a carrier of fire. And so we definitely want all of those removed. So your pampas or your jabuta grass, I guess is how we say that. Again, very flammable. They spread fire quickly, and when they get very dried out, they're pretty explosive, and those need to be taken out in the area as well. Juniper, not a good plant to have in a fire-prone area, so we want all of that removed. There's a lot of dead foliage and stuff that can be in there as well, so it's best just to have the juniper removed entirely. And again, we're talking about vacant parcels. We're, in this clear-cut area that we're doing, not, in people's backyards necessarily. And so why do we have an urgency ordinance, and why am I before you tonight? So basically, notice to the property owners and vacant parcels, advise them that they must perform proper weed abatement and removal of combustible vegetation on their properties. We send those out in May 1st. The weed abatement and removal should be accomplished before the onset of fire season, which due to the changing climate occurs more early in the summer months. Unfortunately, we're starting off very early again this year, and fires are already starting. According to these new requirements, it needs to be adopted now by a 4/5 vote, and may be included in the notices that the Division of Fire Prevention sends to property owners. And again, we typically send those notices out May 1st with a date of June 1st to have the weed abatement ordinance and property owners clear their property. And so with that, I think that ends it, and I will open it up to any questions you may have.
Thanks, Chief Berman. That was awesome. Council, would you like to comment or ask questions of Chief Berman? Very, very well versed in this stuff. Colleen.
I'd just like to really show my appreciation for Deputy Chief Bierman's work on this, and also our Chief Myers. We met with them as a subcommittee, and we had requested a little deeper detail in defining some things, making it very, very clear so it was really bulletproof. And I see everything we requested in all the details in here, and I know that was a lot of work and patience on their part. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Cliff?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Chief Bierman. So I just want to get some clarification. So the land that the city owns, in the Brisbane Acres, that is in sensitive habitat areas, that is exempt from this ordinance, is that correct?
That is correct. City-owned land is exempt. The land that the city, a lot of the lots the city has purchased is because of the sensitive species, et cetera. And so the city is exempt.
Okay. And then, as I'm sure you know, the city doesn't own all of the Brisbane Acres that are in sensitive habitat areas. Many of the parcels that are in the Brisbane Acres that are in private hands are in sensitive habitat. Does this ordinance exempt them from having to do the work that is required in this ordinance, or would they have to clear cut?
Well, it's not that it would exempt them, but private land would still need to work through a process to ensure some sort of fire safety is done there. If there are sensitive areas of their property, again, probably Randy may be able to address that better than me, but I know that and again, I've only been now here in the department for 2 years, so I'm not real familiar with all the different sensitive lands that are there, but we just because an area is sensitive doesn't mean that we can't do any work. It means we need to be aware of what that sensitivity is.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm glad that you called out those different invasive species like eucalyptus and the broom and the pampas grass, the juniper. To me, yeah, if we can have some kind of ordinance that gets rid of those things, absolutely. But of course, you know, in these privately held lands, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, we're protecting our critical habitat land that we own as a city, but I want to make sure that these other parcels that are in private hands also kind of have a similar protection, because, you know, butterflies, they don't care if it's on private land or public land. They just want to use.
Yeah, and we do that. Our current annual project we do is that do about 1,200 feet of a shaded fuel break and fuel reduction off of Trinity Road there. And, you know, we work very closely with the county parks, et cetera, on that habitat. And they've gone out and identified some butterfly habitat, but then we do all the work around it through it where we can. You know, the bottom line is same thing with wildfire. It's not choosy on, it's
Yes.
not, you know, picking on whose land it is, right? So it's one of those things where we just gotta kind of balance what is realistic. And again, you know, we don't want to be removing all the vegetation on the side of a hill that's going to bring everything down. And sometimes it's just so steep. I was up there the other day looking at some of those roads, and those drainages are so steep and so overgrown. Yeah. You can't safely even get someone in there to work. So, you know, we will have to work through these challenges as they come up. But the bottom line is we definitely need to reduce the fuel loading on these vacant parcels.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And that work that's been done on Trinity, that really makes sense because there are houses right there.
Yes.
Right. But, you know, some of the Brisbane acres that are a little bit higher up, you know, I mean, they're just as, those sites are just as good as some of the sites that the city owns and have plenty of distance from buildings. So I know that you chimed in, Randy, and Randy, if you know, like what I'm mentioning is that because you have, you know, of course, more of a history with our town than Chief Berman has. So if you wouldn't mind kind of providing some feedback.
Happy to take a shot. So I mean, all the points that are being made are good points. I think the distinction between the publicly held properties in the upper acres and the privately held is that we have an active conservation and preservation program where you fund money, and every year we go out there and we do selective removal of invasive species and do everything we can to protect endangered species. The way those endangered species are protected on the private parcels is that when the private property owners get a notice from the fire marshal and they have to go out and do weed abatement, they then have to go to the county to get a site activity permit. And the county, I'm assuming they operate the same way they do for us when we go along some of our right-of-way, like along Guadalupe, where they send a biologist out and they actually mark where the sensitive and protected species are, and they tell you those you don't cut.
Okay, you know, that makes sense, right? I mean, I'm just thinking of when we've gotten the permit to do the San Bruno half marathon, right? Yeah. We can't run that race until they go out there and they have that biologist put out the little flags and make sure that it's all good. You know, just kind of thinking this through, you know, a lot of what has encroached on the butterfly habitat hasn't necessarily been the invasive species, but the overgrown coyote bush, you know, and so if perhaps, you know, some of that is cut down so that then grass lands on these sensitive habitat areas that need to have the clear cutting, you know, there could be a potential additional benefit besides just reduction in the fire load. That potentially a possibility.
I'll look at DC Behrman for that, for fire load reduction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, we want a good defensible line put in when we ask for this 100-foot clearance. I mean, it for the most part needs to be taken clear of any brush species that is not protected or sensitive that can carry fire. And so I think we just need to, whatever we can do. In fact, that Trinity Road project, we're looking at additional grant funding and stuff in the future. The governor's put $750 million out there right now for wildfire prevention in the state. And we're looking at tapping into some of that money to continue our field break that we have in there. And I've spoken to Randy about it. And we've done some mapping and stuff to see. But, in California now, the areas that used to be, the coast as an example, what happened in Santa Cruz, San Mateo County this last summer was an eye-opener for a lot of us that have fought fire for many years in the state. And you start burning those kind of fires along the coastal areas that is typically a moist area, not susceptible usually to these large fires. The state is changing rapidly, and we're just trying to start getting ahead of it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Madison, Colleen.
I'm just ready to vote, but I know we have a public comment, but I don't have any questions.
Any other comments? Because I have a comment. No? Okay, so I just want to add, you guys have known me for years, and thanks, Deputy Chief Bierman. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Fire safety and safety in Brisbane has been, one of my biggest things for many, 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 many years. And I just want to say something about juniper. So if anybody is listening, that they can hear this. The juniper was responsible for the majority of the devastation in the Oakland Hills fire. And the reason being is because it wasn't taken care of for many years. It was an ornamental that was planted and very popular with people for many, many years. And what happened with the juniper berries, which was in the picture that Chief Berman showed you, those little tiny berries, what happened in that fire, in those narrow hills in Oakland, was those little berries heated up to 2,000 degrees and shot off like bullets. And they found them spot firing 2 miles away from where they'd actually heated up. So those things were the cause of so much of the fire in the Oakland Hills. Am I correct? Chief Bierman?
I haven't seen that, but I haven't done a lot of research on that fire.
I got that from our chief, and it stuck in my head. So those kind of things are things that we can get out of our gardens, because if we had a fire and they're going to shoot 2 miles away, we've got a big problem here in Brisbane. The other thing is we have one source in Northern California that goes around and monitors the moisture content of our forests, and that is in the Santa Cruz Mountains. The average is 135, the moisture content. Last year, the moisture content had gone down to 115%, 115. And this year, they're going out and they're not seeing any new growth in the forests in Santa Cruz Mountains. And the moisture content of those plants is now down to 95. So we've gone from 135 to 115 to 95 in 2 years, which is absolutely catastrophic from a fire perspective for us. Think about it for your own family, if nothing else. I mean, this is something that I'm very passionate about. And, these numbers are devastating for us unless we really clear up around us. So it's something I really want everybody to think about. Anyway, my 2 cents. Any other comments?
Madam Mayor, we do have a hand raised from Michelle Salmon.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask questions and to speak about this. This is obviously very near and dear to my heart as well. And overall, I am very in favor of this. I do have some concerns. I know that this is going to be a financial burden on the people who will be required to clear property that they have not cleared before. And particularly in the specific ways that would benefit the environment and the habitat and not be destructive to what we're trying to preserve on San Bruno Mountain. And so I'm concerned that we should add something about the use of herbicides, and that has to be done very judiciously, because some people may just want to go out and spray everything and poison it all and clear their land. And so I'm very concerned about that. I'm concerned about people who will just go out and frankly just clear cut to save themselves the financial burden of doing it properly. I'm obviously very concerned about the rare plants and the native plants, coyote bush accepted, that might get trashed in this process. I'm also concerned about the impact on wildlife. I'm also concerned about the burden on the county that you mentioned about, you know, the county sending out a biologist in compliance with the HCP for all of these acres properties. That's going to be very onerous for the county when they have so much other work to do in maintaining the habitat. So I'm not exactly sure how to handle that. And in your list of hot plants, I hope you add gorse, because we're starting to see it more and more on this end of the mountain, whereas it used to just be on the westerly end of the mountain. So when you were mentioning, you know, Scotch broom, French broom, all the other ugly brooms, could you please add gorse to your list? And one of the concerns I have too is that people sometimes just want to clear cut broom or cut it down. But then when you cut it, it grows back stronger the next year and grows back stronger the next year until it gets so onerous that you cannot pull it. And that's been a problem on the Trinity Road project, where I've gone back and tried to pull broom that has been cut multiple years. The first time we did the project, we actually had them pull the broom out, and that was the most effective. But now we have older stumps that look like they're a small plant, and you go to approach it and it's actually a huge root ball that you're trying to pull up, with just a tiny little stump left. So I'm concerned about the method that we're going to use to enforce or help people meet the requirements of this ordinance once we pass it. And so when you said that there's, you know, the governor's put forth a 2.3 $2 billion for this, is there any way the city can help facilitate that with like zero, you know, work some kind of program with zero cost loans for people to be able to clear their properties, or you know, any kind of assistance for that, so that we can make sure that it's done correctly and in perpetuity, so that we don't inadvertently create a worse problem for our future by doing this wrong. So those are my really hard concerns that I'd like this to be addressed, that we include conditions about the use of herbicides, that we use conditions about oversight, biological oversights, that we have a biologist on staff, or someone who has been properly trained to work in concert with the county to do a biological assessment on a property before it's clear cut. Those are really real concerns. Overall, I'm very much in favor of this, but I do not think it addresses in detail, in the minutia, some of the things that need to be addressed. It's good, but it needs to be just a little bit better to make it as effective and as palatable and as actionable as possible, because it's not just about enforcement, it's about proper action in this. I mean, it cost, you know, $20,000 to remove a eucalyptus tree. So let's get real and figure out how we can help people do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ingrid. Any other public comment?
Seeing no further hands, and I have received no further correspondences.
Thank you very much. Okay, council discussion. Sherry, I know you want to speak.
Yeah, you know, I'll just speak up. Yeah, you know, I'm in favor of moving forward with the ordinance. Seems like, you know, the subcommittee has worked with staff and Chief Bierman to come up with the you know, a very responsible plan. I feel assured that these sensitive acres that are in private hands will be evaluated by the county, and that there'll be proper safeguards put in place to make sure that you know, critical habitat isn't destroyed. So yeah, I'm good with moving forward.
Terry, did you want to say something?
No, I do have a little bit of a concern on the all trees under 6 feet need to be cut, because that means we will never have any replacement trees if we're cutting every baby tree down the road forever in these swaths of land. But I think that the idea behind it is good and virtuous, and I do hope that some of the concerns with people using herbicides is not going to be reality, because that's not going to take that, it's going to just make the plant die and be more flammable. So it's not going to achieve those goals. So I do hope that the county has the resources and that we have enough leadway through staff and the fire department to grant waivers where needed and give people more time where needed, but that everyone needs to be contacted about this and move forward with it. So yeah, I would say we should.
Maybe we need a clarification on where it says removal of invasive species, waste material, and combustible vegetation, and to exclude poisoning of, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, just a thought, because I didn't read poisoning of trees into this ordinance, but if we need clarification, I think that's great. Madison?
No, I'm good with it. I think that Michelle did make a lot of points, and I think that, you know, those should be taken into consideration, especially with respect to, you know, native plants. I would hate to see those get damaged in the process. So and maybe staff could review and see what comments were made that seem like they're doable in, you know, implementing in this, but I'm okay with moving forward with the ordinance.
Okay, Colleen?
Great comments, Michelle. One thing popped out, the herbicides. That was something I brought up, and I believe I was told it's not illegal to use it, that we can't prevent it. So if I'm wrong, someone correct me. And that's why it's not included in this wording.
Go ahead, Rainey. Councilmember Mackin is very correct in her recollection. During the subcommittee meeting, we talked about this, and I mentioned that the city doesn't have the authority to restrict the use of herbicides and pesticides on private property. That authority is solely under the county agricultural commissioner. It's been a bone of contention amongst the cities for many, many years, especially those of us that have a solid IPM policy, but unfortunately it's not something that we can impose.
And then back with regard to the cost, I understand the implications there, but part of our thinking also was that if the major upfront cost of doing this once is to really clear it well, then the subsequent years are not going to cost as much. But somewhere we have to start, because we are in such extreme danger. I don't think we can afford not to.
You know, and we have had over the last 20 years a history of absentee landlords purchasing large swaths of land for potential profit making in the future, and then just letting those lands go fallow. And that's part of our problem, is that, you know, back years ago when individual landowners owned these open lots of land, they were being pretty responsible and maintaining them and, you know, trimming trees down and keeping things clear. But when you've got investors purchasing large lots of land for future investment potential, and then they're not doing anything with it, that's making the problem even worse. So that's part of the reason this ordinance has come to the table. Thank you. So if there's no more comments, I am going to ask for a first and second to adopt the urgency ordinance number 661.
No. Go ahead.
Sorry, Tom.
No.
No. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was talking to my dog to say no.
I'm like, you can tell me no, Tom. You can tell me no too.
It looks like there's a hand raised. I can't.
Madam Mayor, there's a hand raised by Michelle Salmon.
Thank you, Michelle. Go ahead.
I would love to see the city work out a very easy plan for property owners of the acres to, if the cost of maintaining the property is too high for some marginal owners, that we work out some kind of arrangement where they can donate the land to the city of Brisbane for open space and ease their way to be able to have a tax break to apply elsewhere as a compensation for that donation, or maybe a partial thing where we can purchase the property from them at a lower rate, and then the balance of that is considered as can be arranged to be a donation, and they get a tax write-off for that. I think that might really help us with absentee property owners that invested in property that we consider to be not buildable or that we don't want built on, that is the interface with the habitat. And this ordinance might be the perfect vehicle to spur some property owners who may be at their end of their time here to go ahead and donate or make an arrangement with the city of Brisbane to acquire that property for open space. And I would love to see this council take a proactive approach on putting together a very clear program for those marginal property owners to be able to safely donate their property to open space and get a tax write-off for whatever other benefits they might have, and that we would be able to then add those properties to our open space and our interface zone with the wildland habitats. So please, please, maybe this is an incredible opportunity for us to do this and make it easy peasy for people to donate their land to the city of Brisbane for open space along that area. It's a very forward-thinking thing, but I think that we have the resources to do that, and I think that we have the will and the mindset to do that. And I really hope you consider that, because the financial burden for clearing an acre, one of the acre's properties, is high, especially if you have eucalyptus on it. So thank you for considering that.
Thank you, Michelle. So we can put that up for consideration at some later point, but we need to get to what's on the agenda right now. So can I get a first and a second to adopt the urgency ordinance number 661 concerning the removal of invasive species, waste material and combustible vegetation, and requiring fire breaks on unimproved properties?
Yeah, you know, I'll make that motion. I just want to get clarification, because I thought that was an excellent idea from Michelle. And so it doesn't have to be in the ordinance. This is something that the city can just do on its own as we're reaching out to property owners. I'm just kind of curious on that.
We can't discuss that tonight.
I know. I'm just asking.
Wait, you guys stop. I asked if we could have a motion for this and get this on. We can discuss all these other great ideas anytime you want, but this is what's on the agenda. This is what I'm asking for. Can I have a first and a second?
Okay, yeah, whatever. Okay.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
To adopt the urgency ordinance concerning removal of invasive species, waste material, and combustible vegetation.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I will second it.
Thank you. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz.
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin.
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
Mayor Cunningham.
Aye. Thank you. Great ideas. Let's bring them to the table. Absolutely. Okay. Now, because I missed this before, and I apologize again, item number 9, staff reports, city manager report on upcoming activities, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We'll try to run through this pretty quickly. We'll be doing a weekly mobile testing site at the community park on Thursdays at 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Individuals can come down there at no cost and get tested for COVID-19. We will be having an upcoming Earth Day on April 22nd. There's a number of events happening on over the next week. Community-led Crocker Park Trail cleanup will be this Saturday at 10 a.m. There's a Climate Jeopardy program being put on through the Open Space Committee next Wednesday night at 6:30 p.m. Compost giveaway from South San Francisco Scavengers sometime next week. We'll get information out on that, and we'll be announcing the 2nd annual Recycled Arts and Craft Contest. Also next Thursday, during the hours of the Farmers Market 3 to 7, the Parks and Recreation Department will be doing a Spring Fest. You can sign up your children for this recreational fun day on our website starting now. And then finally, the ongoing series of Let's Talk Housing, all about the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA, will be next Thursday, April 22nd at 6 p.m. Let's Talk Housing by San Mateo County. We'll be doing that. And then finally, the city and county, well, the next one, the city and county currently need your input on a number of things. We have a diversity survey on the Brisbane website. The Complete Streets Safety Committee is doing a survey and would like to hear from people about on-street parking. The county OES, Operation of Emergency Services, updating their 2016 multi-jurisdictional local hazard mitigation plan, and they have a survey on their website also. And then not on the list here, but we are working with the Reimagine Samtrans folks to do a session out at the farmers market in the near future and get information out about the plans you saw this evening, or the options you saw this evening. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Macias, who has one final item to go over with you.
Thank you, Clay. Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. I just want to take a brief moment to put out a friendly safety reminder to our residents. During spring and summer, we generally get an uptick of thefts from unlocked vehicles. I just wanted to remind our residents to always secure their windows and lock the doors upon exiting their cars, and never leave any items of value in their vehicle. If you see a vehicle that is unattended and is left unsecured, please feel free to contact the police department on the non-emergency number, and we will gladly find the owner or assist in securing the vehicle. And the same goes for your home. Always check your windows and doors, make sure they're locked and secure before leaving your home. Remember, you are the eyes and ears of our community. If you see something, say something. Call the police to report it. Let's keep working together to keep our community safe. And that's all I have for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 10, Mayor Council Matters. Item J, countywide assignments and subcommittee reports. Who would like to start? Colleen, I'm picking you.
This is going to be the fastest report you ever got. We had planning issues subcommittee April 1st and April 13. You know about the first one because that was the weed abatement ordinance. The second one, we looked at the implementation of our general plan, and we're going to be coming back to you with some recommendations. That's all I have.
Okay, Madison.
Her cursor's running around the screen.
Madison.
Facing it.
Okay, all right, we'll pass Madison for now. Terry?
Well, you and I had a meeting with Congresswoman Spear yesterday, where we discussed some of the finances that are maybe going to be coming to the county and how we may have some needs. We also had a discussion with the Kathleen Wentworth about some overflight problems that we're having, and we will be addressing those both through the roundtable and through other means as possible. So that, I think, was my only subcommittee meeting.
Thank you. Cliff?
I had a .org meeting this morning. I invited Clay to attend because we unveiled our new strategic plan. And what's great about this plan is that they've hired a company called On Strategy to help with keeping the plan accountable and transparent. And so, you know, with any strategic plan, you have your goals, and then you have your action plan, and then you have your matrix to, you know, do the measurements of, like, are you successful? But what On Strategy does is that it helps you to stay on track, right? You're putting it out there in the public realm. Whereas, you know, many strategic plans is like, yeah, they get voted on and then it just gets put on the shelf. And Commute.org says, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to put it right out there. They, you know, just addressing things like equity, which they've never really addressed before in their planning, which is really important. And of course, you know, dealing with post-COVID. So that was it.
That's it? Okay, everybody kind of covered everything that I had going on also, so.
We had LunaFest.
Oh, sorry, Madison.
It's okay, got my cursor working. Yeah, we met, we set a date for LunaFest, which is gonna be September 25th. We're shooting for an in-person event, indoors. We'll see how it works out, playing it by ear. So we're going to be reconvening in May to look at what the new guidance is on in-person events to hopefully, you know, determine whether doing something in person is feasible in September. We did talk about having a virtual option for those people who didn't feel comfortable attending an in-person event, that there would be a way that they could still, you know, be a part of the event if in a way that they were more comfortable with. So we're getting underway.
Awesome. Anybody got anything else they want to add before we move on? No? Okay. So moving on to item K, City Council meeting schedule. The next scheduled meeting of the Brisbane City Council is on May the 6th. I didn't see any written communications. Ingrid, do we have any?
That's correct. We had none between April 2nd through April 15th.
Wow. Okay. Everybody must have been on vacation. That's great. Okay. So moving on to item 11, our communications number 2. Any item that was not on this agenda, if there's anybody at 10:28 this evening who would like to speak on an item that was not on our agenda tonight, let Ingrid know. Any texts, emails, anything?
I received no written correspondence and I do not see a hands up from the attendee.
Great, thank you very much. So I think we're kind of done. We're going to adjourn to the City Council meeting of April 15th is now done and over, and everybody can have an enjoyable rest of their evening. Thank you very much. And we'll see you later.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.